The Great Pyramid, located on the Giza Plateau in Cairo. In 1977, engineer and author Chris Dunn began forming a revolutionary new hypothesis that this seventh wonder of the world wasn't a tomb, but a power plant. Dunn's hypothesis was that hydrogen gas traveled from the Queen's chamber to the King's chamber. Then the vibrations from the subterranean chamber energized the hydrogen atoms proposed and created a microwave energy beam. But then in 1993, his theory got an upgrade. A German robotics engineer, Rudolf Gantenbrink, on contract to install ventilation fans in the King's chamber, sent a robot down a very small shaft to see what he was working with. Suddenly, the robot stopped and revealed a small metal door with 2 pins. Chris concluded that these looked like electrodes. The explanation started to make sense to scholars, archaeologists, engineers, and journalists who only seemed to connect its existence to religious means.
When we look at the Great Pyramid, especially using Chris Dunn's Giza power plant hypotheses on how we see it built like a Faraday cage, we see granite, sandstone, limestone. It's a technology, it's a power plant. We see these obelisks acting like transmitters for energy that I believe they were experimenting with electromagnetic energy.
Electromagnetic energy? If Chris Dunn's theory has weight to it, how do the obelisks that once graced the Giza Plateau also seem to support this theory? The theory that ancients were creating and using this energy. For that answer, we travel 27 miles away from the Giza Plateau, where we find evidence of a great temple buried in the sand and forgotten by time. East of the Nile River, in the northern region of Greater Cairo, lies the Egyptian district known as El Matarea. This location was once a region within the ancient city of Heliopolis, one of the oldest cities of ancient Egypt. The only thing left of this ancient center is one obelisk that stands as a placeholder for a once great city dedicated to the sun and the god Ra. An account from the time of Ramses III, 12th century BCE, records that in Heliopolis, 12,963 people were employed just at the Temple of Ra alone. What was so special about this temple and the god Ra? The origin of the original temple may be unknown, but the Greeks called it Heliopolis and revered its ancient power by adopting its symbols and worship. Some of these symbols we still use today. Experts believe that this great city might hold the secrets of an unseen power. Is it possible we might glean from this fallen temple the invisible frequency that once graced the Giza Plateau? Matthias suggests we must understand the meaning of the sun and the god Ra.
This god was the sun, but it was not precisely the sun itself. It was also the light of the sun. It was the vibration that connects us all. In ancient times, in Atlantean times, we knew that everything was mind. And we call mind with the sound R. R. The sound R was the letter for the head, was the letter for the thoughts, the ideas. And the letter A was the sound for the spirit or the falcon, the hawk that is in the skies, the one that sees everything from above. So the sound R would be the sound that expresses the vision from above and the thinking of God. Ra was never a person, he was never a god. Sometimes we create mistakes in Egyptian interpretation because for Egyptians the way they have to share the information was by hieroglyphics and by icons. What Egyptians did was to understand that the divine was only one, that this is the thought of Atlantis. The divine is only one, like the sun, with many rays. So each one of the rays has different color, so a different geometry, so a different aspect, potential, attribute. So all the reality that exists is just a projection from the light of the sun.
Could the potential of the sun's energy have been understood through the worship of Ra? Or, as Andrew Collins puts it, through the largest university in ancient times, a university that boasted a resume in power.
Heliopolis is arguably not only one of the oldest cities in Egypt, but it was also the first university. And we know that people would come from all over the ancient world to learn the Egyptian wisdom and knowledge at Heliopolis. And here also was obelisks. And these obelisks were used to mark time. Not only did their shadows tell you the time of day, but also the length of the shadows of those obelisks told you what time of year it was, the time of the equinoxes, the time of the solstices. And this was all part of this greater understanding of Egyptian wisdom and knowledge that went back to the very beginning. The fact that here at Heliopolis you have this knowledge of calendars and of cycles and of time. And this, of course, was something that influenced the whole of ancient Egypt from the time of the pyramids of Giza. It controlled kingship as well. It controlled the rituals that the kings and the queens would do and their calendar across the year. And in other words, everything began at Heliopolis. It was seen as a place of creation. Even its Egyptian name was significant. It was Anu, which meant the city or place of the pillar, the place where it all began, the place of the original stone of creation known as the Ben.
The four pillars to understand the worshipping of Ra were what we call east, west, north, and south. Of course, in the north, Ra, the sun, the one that guides everyone. In the south, Amun-Ra, which would be the place where we call home. And then the Kefer-Ra, which is the rising one, the east, the one that is being birthed. And the other one, Atum-Ra, which is the death and also the invisible, so where the light disappears. These four pillars are the four aspects of light, which we used to call Ur. So Ur is the physical aspect of the consciousness, Ar. So from this aspect of understanding, the Egyptians created these four different gods that are the aspects of just one god, which is the sun. So these four aspects were also treated in the vision of Atlantis.
Why were these cycles of the sun so important? Maybe the secrets lay in the design of the structure of the temple and its mysterious field of obelisks.
Heliopolis was extraordinary because it is the foundation stone of Egyptian culture, and Egyptian priestly culture especially. It started off with an enclosure, a rectangular enclosure, upon which was built a structure resembling the mathematical reduction of the universe. So just that simple rectangle was a mathematical reduction of everything that exists, in its most simplistic form. And then they put a perch inside this rectangular enclosure, upon which sat the Bennu bird. And over time, it became a field of obelisks. In fact, there was one Arab chronicler that described it as a forest of obelisks, because every pharaoh that approached that academy over the course of time added their own signature.
One of the most powerful and potent symbols of Ra is the obelisk. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs would always seek to build one of these massive, sometimes 1,000-ton obelisks made out of red granite, and they referred to them as sun sticks or power sticks. They could channel the power of Ra into the ancient Egyptian civilization.
Channeling power? Could these obelisks have been more than a symbol of Ra, but an actual conductor of energy?
These obelisks were connecting energetically because they had metal in their bases and water underneath them. The metal went into the water, and the center of the obelisk is quartz, and all of this was like a giant conductor of energy. They were like a communication, transportation symbol that the gods came from the heavens, and that these obelisks were pointing up to the heavens, bringing energy back down and sending that energy back up.
If this is true, how would these pillars of granite and quartz conduct energy? Physicist Nassim Haramein suggests the ancients knew a specific science that can only be understood by studying the cycles of the sun.
The sun itself is a very large energy event. The sun in our solar system is 99.9% the mass of our solar system. All the planets put together is not even 1% the mass of the sun. And so it's a huge energy event that we see every day. We're far from it, so we only get a little bit of its energy. But we know that that energy can be converted to produce very strong effects. And so we see that in their structures, in their temple, they bring in the sun in certain orientations so that they could manipulate the sun in certain ways to produce what appears to have been some energy effects.
Is it possible that the ancients used these fields of obelisks made of quartz and granite to create thermal energy that then transformed into electrical energy?
If you know anything about shape and how it interacts with stone, you begin to realize that the obelisks are actually finely tuned tuning forks. Now, if you follow the argument that every sacred site on the face of the earth, without exception, is built not only on the intersecting lines of the earth's energy grid, but the stones themselves are hardwired in a certain way to direct that energy in a certain way that can now be measured, the obelisks themselves, if you happen to look at the remaining ones, they're all ever so slightly different.
Heat energy is all over us. You can channel it like the sun does. And anything that receives heat will start vibrating. So what happens is that it will start vibrating at a molecular level, and this vibration is the resonant frequency. Crystals, like quartz, will do the same thing, because these crystals have the property of transferring mechanical energy to electrical energy. This ability of shifting from one energy to another has an interesting feature. This feature is that the resonant frequency of oscillation is very constant.
If these obelisks were oscillating from the sun and creating energy, could the metal plates and the water around the obelisks create a capacitor that changed the mechanical energy into electrical energy?
This oscillation is not self-sustaining. You have to have a kind of storage tank, and that's where the capacitor comes in. The storage tank works in a way that you can tune it so you can find the exact resonant frequency. So the crystal and the capacitor work together. The capacitor is an electric component that stores energy in an electric field. When used inside a circuit, it will provide the stored charge once the electric field is removed, therefore providing current.
If this is true, could the ancients have been harnessing this power and directing it toward a source?
So when you're talking about power distribution, you could use cables, metallic cables, to extract energy or the current from out of the capacitor, and would deliver this power to a distant receiver or load. Or you could use interconnected rods also along the way, and it would still be a viable solution.
But has there been any evidence of such a system? In 1994, archaeologists excavating the remains of a 4,500-year-old Egyptian funerary pyramid complex unearthed a sophisticated copper system. This copper pipe was found inside the temple closest to the pyramid, which is called the mortuary temple. If such pipes were used in transferring energy, is it possible there were hidden tunnels or shafts that were built to house them? A full-scope investigation beneath the Giza Plateau has not been thoroughly explored. However, this discovery suggests that at one time, a system of pipes, whether used for drainage or energy, was used on the Giza Plateau. Could the ancients have been harnessing the energy from these obelisks and sending it to other areas? Sonia Grace points to another interesting connection.
The obelisks that surrounded the temple for Ra were representing not only Ra and his great power, but they actually were pointing up to the heavens, to Sirius, where he actually was representing the sun behind the sun. The rituals that were done at the temple of Ra had everything to do with worshiping the sun. There were initiates that were trained in all of the energy work that Ra was associated with within the pyramids. The pyramid has an energetic force. The energy goes down into the earth. It takes you actually to tunnels that are underneath the pyramid that the ancient people built.
For today, we can say internet that connects us all. For them was like a kind of technology that connects us with the cosmos. It's a different type of technology, of course, and is a technology that we inherit from Sirius. This is why the pyramids were built in this world. Most of them were built during the period of Atlantis, around the era of Virgo and the era of Leo, around 15 BC to 9,000 BC. But the structures, the planification of how to do that was built by the Syrian people.
If you followed the argument that the entire Egyptian temple structure was pretty much pre-designed, there was a blueprint already set up, well, it turns out that when you actually do look at the rising of Orion's belt, if you keep following the trajectory, you see Sirius rising above the horizon at the same moment, and that matches exactly the position of Heliopolis, where it is today. But that's not the end of the story, because in the ancient world, they always worked in triangles. And I always wanted to know, where's the other triangle, given what we have left of the Giza Plateau? And it took a little bit of time. And it turns out that if you go to one of the oldest mosques in Old Cairo, and the mosques always point to Mecca, and the Arabs were master mathematicians and astronomers, they don't make mistakes. And this one does not point to Mecca. It's 10 degrees off. That's a huge error by any standard. And Mecca's not that far away from Cairo. It's, pretty much a straight shot. And I figured, why would this be not pointing to Mecca unless it's hiding something under it, because that was what was done in the old days. So I decided to figure out that this may be an inclination as to what was going on. And it turns out that when you put a pin on the map at the Mosque of Ibn Tulum, and you put a pin on the center pyramid, Giza, and at the center of Heliopolis, it's a perfect isosceles triangle, and I mean perfect.
Have we just begun to see all the connections this one temple seems to have to the pyramids on the Giza Plateau? Could otherworldly beings have connected the temple and the pyramids to Sirius so that we would remember who designed the Giza Plateau? Or were they connecting the great power of this temple to the pyramids to show us how they worked in harmony? Chris Dunn explains that although the pyramids and the obelisks are separated, they do use the Earth as part of an oscillating system.
To describe the Giza power plant, we go back to the source of the energy that feeds into it. We go to the Earth. Energy is drawn through it. And so once it's primed, it becomes like a coupled oscillator. A coupled oscillator is a device that's attached to a larger vibrating body. It's in tune or harmonically tuned to that larger vibrating body. And as long as the vibrating body continues to feed energy or vibrate, then the coupled oscillator will vibrate in sympathy with it. It will draw energy from it.
Could these famous obelisks from the Temple of Heliopolis and the Great Pyramid share the same oscillation?
The sun is the master frequency transmitter of the entire solar system. And NASA actually did recordings of the sound of the sun, the actual sound of the sun. And what NASA did is, because you can't hear wavelengths that long, which are mostly in delta, they squished the waves so you could hear it. And it makes this incredible kind of throbbing, pulsing sound, which you can actually hear. Now, in my years of actually calculating the frequencies of the Great Pyramid as a square wave slope tuner, I converted the Great Pyramid into a series of musical notes, 10 musical notes. And when I was mixing the wavelengths of the 4 uneven sides of the Great Pyramid, they're only off by 1 frequency number each. North, south, west, east is the firing sequence of the Great Pyramid. And I played that audibly, and I compared it to the sound of the sun. They were resembling each other perfectly. I went, oh my God.
In 2018, in the Journal of Applied Physics, scientists were able to take the equipment to measure what was happening inside the chambers of the Great Pyramid in Giza, in Egypt. And what they found was that inside of the 3 primary chambers in that pyramid, there is an accumulation of electromagnetic energy between 200 and 600 meter wavelengths. These are very long waves that we're talking about. And when they did the imagery of the pyramid, you can see very clearly how that energy is concentrated in the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the subterranean chamber as well.
Could the residue from this great technology still vibrate in the Great Pyramid? And could this theory help us understand what the many obelisks in the Temple of Heliopolis were used for? Although separated, could the obelisks and the pyramids act as transmitting devices, possibly transmitting energy or an RF frequency?
The shape of the pyramid and its importance in the function of the power plant, it functions like an antenna. It's like transmitters and receivers, you know, where you have, is the Great Pyramid a transmitter or a receiver? It could be both, and the same with other structures. And if you have a system like in Egypt where you have obelisks in certain parts, and then you have the pyramids in the north, temples in the south with the obelisks, were they communicating back and forth through the ground? Possibly.
On the plateau, of course, the enormity of the Great Pyramid is just almost beyond our comprehension. In fact, one of the theories is that the pyramid was a sort of a speaker. It was a sonic device, and its purpose was to get it ringing or singing so that it could ultimately bathe all of the Egyptian civilization in a base frequency that would effectively entrain everybody into the same brainwave frequency and have everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak.
Whatever purpose this energy was created for, it seems that not only do the Great Pyramids stifle our minds with wonder, but also the symbol of Ra is implanted deep within our subconscious. His worship and science may have been forgotten, but the symbol of his great power seems to have not left our current society. It's as if we try to understand the power by keeping the symbolism alive.
Ra still exists in our contemporary mindset. Every day, people handle a $1 bill and they look on the back and there's the all-seeing eye on top of an unfinished pyramid. That's actually called the Eye of Providence, and that is the Eye of Ra. The Freemasons who designed that as the logo for the American enterprise would tell you that that is the all-seeing Eye of Ra. And we also see Ra in our contemporary culture in movies. When you look at one of the most popular movies of all times is Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones holds the staff of Ra and uses it to find the Ark of the Covenant. So Ra is very much in our consciousness. We just don't think about it all the time.
What's so interesting is that as early as the first half of the 20th century, Sigmund Freud realized that there was some relationship between this Aten disk, the representation of the sun, and the religion of the earliest Israelites, and that almost certainly this had come at the time of Moses and the Exodus out of Egypt, which he believed, and I think is possibly true, took place around the time of the pharaoh Akhenaten. Freud demonstrated in writing the Aten became Adon, as in Adonai, one of the forms of Yahweh or the Almighty God, and that one of the hymns of the Aten was so similar to one of the Psalms, Psalm 104, that the two had to have come from the same source. So in other words, Ra, as the Aten disk, continued on as a force, as an aspect of the Almighty God himself being carried through Judeo-Christian and also obviously Islamic tradition into the modern age. So in many ways, all of the monotheistic religions of today still worship the god Ra.
If Ra is still being worshipped or used to represent true power, is it possible the symbol and power of the actual obelisks were also adapted into modern culture?
The people who took the obelisk from Heliopolis and placed them in other places did so because they believed that the power of the obelisk would actually create kind of a magical effect of prosperity in their areas. And I think that came directly from early Egyptian belief that these things did help their societies. So these are conduits where you can collect the ambient energy of the earth and then have that energy actually energize your geographic area.
Could the Great Pyramid and the other pyramids on the Giza Plateau be built to contain and create immense amounts of electromagnetic energy? And could the many obelisks connected to the Temple of Heliopolis also be built for the same reason? If true, might this great symbol of Ra have been the source of great power, a transmitter and receiver of energy and communication? Is it possible then that the connection to Sirius suggests a massive infrastructure built on the Giza Plateau was by otherworldly beings to create a system that would influence humanity through frequencies? Since the dawn of time, humanity has looked upon the sun as the creator. Its image morphed over time to create such a power we seem to have lost. If the everyday man were to rediscover the ancient knowledge and meaning of our relationship to the sun, maybe one day we too will understand that what we receive from this burning mass of energy millions of miles away goes far beyond simply biological nourishment. It is something that can be harnessed and used to forward society. It might just be the invisible force that can change the state of the world.